Welcome to Curiosity, where every story is steeped in mystery. Today, we delve into the brownstone on West 35th Street with Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin in The Persistent Memory. It's a tale of buried wartime secrets, recovered memories, and the moral complexities that linger decades after difficult decisions are made. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Drop it in the comments. So settle in, pour yourself a glass of beer, Wolfe would approve, and let the mystery unfold. The Persistent Memory. Chapter 1. A Doctor's Dilemma. It was Tuesday, April 8th, and spring had finally decided to make an appearance in New York after teasing us for weeks. The morning had started with Wolfe's customary 2 hours in the plant rooms with Theodore, followed by his descent at 11 o'clock, precisely to start the day's business in the office. Not that there was any. For 3 days straight we'd had no clients, and while our bank balance was healthy enough that Wolfe wasn't yet eyeing my new tie with disapproval, another week of this, and he'd start suggesting economies. I was typing up notes on our last case, mostly to keep myself occupied, when the doorbell rang. The front door of the old brownstone on West 35th Street doesn't get much action when we're not on a case, so I put my papers aside and went to answer it. Through the one-way glass, I saw a woman in her 40s, well-dressed in a tailored navy suit that had never seen the inside of a department store. She was standing perfectly straight, but something in the set of her shoulders told me she was carrying a weight. I opened the door. "Good morning. May I help you?" "I hope so. I'd like to see Mr. Nero Wolfe. I'm Dr. Eleanor Bennett." Her voice was steady and cultured, with just a hint of Boston underneath. She handed me a card that identified her as a psychiatrist with an office on Park Avenue. "Do you have an appointment, doctor?" "Bennett?" "No, but it's an urgent matter. I understand Mr. Wolfe sees people during these hours." "He does. Please come in." I took her coat, a lightweight cashmere that probably cost more than I make in a week, and escorted her to the office. Wolfe was at his desk with a book, which he put aside as we entered. He doesn't like interruptions, but business is business, and a Park Avenue psychiatrist might mean a decent fee. "Dr. Eleanor Bennett to see you, sir," I announced, showing her to the red leather chair near his desk. Wolfe inclined his head a quarter of an inch. "Good morning, madam." "Good morning, Mr. Wolfe. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment." She settled into the chair with the kind of perfect posture that comes from good breeding rather than effort. "You wish to consult me?" "Yes, on a matter of extreme delicacy." She glanced at me. "Mr. Goodwin is my confidential assistant," Wolfe said. "You may speak freely." I sat at my desk, notebook ready. Dr. Bennett took a deep breath and folded her hands in her lap. "I have a patient. I'll call him Captain Harris for now, though that's not his real name, who is a veteran of World War II. For the past year, he's been working with me on trauma-related memory issues. 3 weeks ago, during a session, he recovered what appears to be a repressed memory from his time in a military hospital in England in 1944. Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. "Appears to be?" "Memory recovery, especially traumatic memory, is complex, Mr. Wolfe. But I've worked with Captain Harris long enough to believe he's neither fantasizing nor confabulating. And this recovered memory concerns what precisely?" Dr. Bennett's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly. "Captain Harris believes he witnessed a murder committed by a man who is now General Robert Marshall. That got my attention. General Marshall was in the papers at least weekly these days, a decorated hero being vetted for a cabinet position." "Pfui," said Wolfe. "A 30-year-old memory, suddenly recovered, accusing a prominent public figure. Madam, I deal in facts, not—" "Someone broke into my office last night," she interrupted, her voice still perfectly controlled. "They took only one thing, Captain Harris's file." Wolfe's lips tightened. He doesn't like being interrupted, but he likes coincidences even less. "And this morning," she continued, I received a call from the hospital. Captain Harris was in a car accident last night. His vehicle went off the road in circumstances the police find suspicious. He's in a coma. I whistled softly. Dr. Bennett gave me a brief glance before turning back to Wolfe. I have reason to believe Captain Harris's life is in danger, Mr. Wolfe, and perhaps my own as well. Wolfe leaned back in his custom-built chair, the only one in the world that could accommodate his 1/7 of a ton comfortably. What precisely do you wish me to do, Doctor? Investigate Captain Harris's claim. Find evidence that either confirms or refutes it. If General Marshall is innocent, Captain Harris deserves to know that his memory is flawed. If he's not, she let the implication hang. My fee is high. Money is not an issue. I'll pay your daily rate plus expenses, and a substantial bonus when the matter is resolved, regardless of the outcome. Wolfe's eyes narrowed fractionally. You have a personal interest beyond your professional concern for your patient. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. My father served under General Marshall. He always spoke of him with the highest regard. I need to know the truth, Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe looked at her for a long moment, then spoke. I make no promises regarding what I may discover, Dr. Bennett. The past is often best left undisturbed. Some ghosts don't rest so easily, Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. Very well. Archie will take the details from you. Your patient's real name, your contact information, and whatever you know of this alleged incident. I will need to speak with Captain Harris when he regains consciousness. If he regains consciousness, Dr. Bennett corrected softly. Indeed. Wolfe sighed, then said the word that always tells me we're taking a case. Satisfactory. I uncapped my pen. This was going to be interesting. Chapter 2. Old Soldiers. After Dr. Bennett left, having provided all the details she could, including Captain William Harris's real name and address, Wolfe leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and pushed his lips in and out. It's what he does when he's organizing facts in that remarkable brain of his. Archie, he said finally, you will visit Captain Harris's residence immediately. Determine if there is any documentation of his therapy sessions that might have escaped the office theft. Yes, sir, I said, getting up. And if by some miracle I find anything, should I bring it back or leave it in place? Bring it. If someone is willing to stage a vehicular accident to silence the captain, they will not hesitate to search his home. I took a cab to the address in Queens, a modest brick apartment building where Harris had lived alone since his wife died 3 years ago. The superintendent, a grizzled man with nicotine-stained fingers named Phelps, became helpful when I flashed my private investigator's license and mentioned that Captain Harris was in the hospital. Good man, the captain, Phelps said, unlocking the door to apartment 3B. Never misses the rent, keeps to himself, was in the big one, you know, Pacific. And Europe, I added, stepping inside. That too. Didn't know that. Hope he pulls through. The apartment was neat as a pin, with military precision evident in how everything was arranged. Photographs on the mantelpiece showed a younger Harris in uniform, another with a pleasant-looking woman I assumed was his late wife, and one of him with a group of veterans at some reunion. Nothing of General Marshall that I could see. I went through the place methodically, checking all the spots where a cautious man might hide sensitive documents. In the second bedroom, converted to a small study, I found a locked metal box in the bottom drawer of the desk. It took me 4 minutes to pick it, which is about 3 minutes longer than it should have, but the lock was good quality. Inside was a bound journal with dates corresponding to Harris's therapy sessions. The most recent entry was from just 2 days ago. April 6th. Dr. B pushed deeper into the England hospital memories today. Keep seeing his face now. Young then, but unmistakable. Marshall standing over Collins's bed. Collins struggling, Marshall's hand over his mouth and nose. Me, too weak to move, to speak, just watching through half-closed eyes from across the ward. The memory feels so real now. But why would he do it? Collins was just another wounded lieutenant. I copied the entry verbatim, then looked through the rest of the journal. There were scattered references to the memory gradually coming into focus over several sessions, but nothing more specific than what I'd just read. The phone rang, making me jump. I let it ring 3 times before picking it up. "Harris Residence," I said. "Mr. Goodwin." It was Dr. Bennett. "Thank goodness. I've been trying to reach you. There's been a development. Captain Harris was deliberately run off the road. The police found paint transfers on his car consistent with a deliberate sideswipe." "Is he still in a coma?" "Yes. The neurologists are cautiously optimistic, but it could be days or weeks before he regains consciousness." I told her about the journal I'd found and read her the latest entry. "That's consistent with what he told me in our sessions," she said, though he mentioned something else, that Collins had been feverish, in and out of consciousness before the incident. I was about to ask more when I heard a faint sound from the apartment hallway. "Dr. Bennett, I'll call you back," I said, and hung up silently. The apartment door opened, and I slipped behind the study door, my hand reaching for the .32 I keep in my shoulder holster. 2 men entered. I could hear their footsteps moving methodically through the living room. "Check the bedroom and study," one said in a low voice. "Be quick about it." I waited until one set of footsteps approached the study, then yanked the door open hard. It caught the intruder square in the face. As he stumbled back, I clipped him on the jaw with a right that had all my weight behind it. He went down like his strings had been cut. The second man appeared in the doorway, reaching inside his jacket. I didn't give him time to finish the movement. 3 quick steps and I drove my shoulder into his midsection, taking us both to the floor. He was good, rolled with the fall and almost got leverage, but I've had practice at this sort of thing. 30 seconds later, he was unconscious too. I searched them both. No identification, just 2 9mm pistols with suppressors and a roll of duct tape. Their intent seemed clear enough. After securing them with their own duct tape, I called Wolfe. "I'm at Harris's apartment," I told him. "Found his therapy journal and got a bonus. 2 uninvited guests who weren't coming for tea. No ID, but they're professionals." "Are the police involved?" "Not yet. Leave immediately. Bring the journal. We'll inform Inspector Kramer after we've had the opportunity to review the material." I did as instructed, slipping out the back way with the journal tucked inside my jacket. As I caught a taxi 3 blocks away, I was already planning my next move. Tomorrow, I would attend the Veterans Affairs luncheon where, according to the morning paper, General Robert Marshall would be the keynote speaker. Something told me the General and I were going to have an interesting conversation. Chapter 3: Records and Recollections. The next morning, I was at the Veterans Affairs luncheon at the Roosevelt Hotel. General Robert Marshall was impressive in person, tall, straight-backed, with the kind of bearing that makes people stand at attention without realizing they're doing it. His silver hair was perfectly trimmed, and when he spoke, the room listened. His speech hit all the right notes about service and sacrifice, with just enough personal anecdotes to make it land. I positioned myself near the reception line afterward, and when my turn came, I gave him my most affable smile. "Archie Goodwin, General. Great speech." He shook my hand firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Did you serve?" "No, sir. I'm here gathering information for an article." His eyes sharpened with interest. "Which publication?" "It's for a profile on military hospital care during World War II, specifically hospitals in England in 1944. It was subtle. I'll give him that. Just a momentary tightening around the eyes, a fraction of a second's pause in the handshake. Then he was smooth again. An unusual focus for an article. Most people prefer stories about battlefield heroics. I find recovery can be as compelling as combat, General. Indeed. He studied me more carefully. "Have we met before, Mr. Goodwin?" "I don't believe so, sir." A man in a dark suit appeared at his elbow. "General, the mayor is waiting." Marshall nodded. "If you have specific questions about military hospitals, Mr. Goodwin, My office would be happy to direct you to appropriate historical resources. He handed me a card with his aide's contact information, then moved on. I'd gotten what I came for, confirmation that the hospital in England was a sensitive spot. Not proof of anything, but a reaction worth noting. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe had deployed the full team. Saul Panzer, the best operative in New York and possibly the Western Hemisphere, was searching for former hospital staff. Fred Durkin was checking military discharge records, and Ori Cather was looking into General Marshall's service history. "Any progress?" I asked Wolfe, settling at my desk. "Fragmentary," he said, putting down his book. The military hospital in question, Station 217 near Oxford, was indeed destroyed in a bombing raid in late 1944. Most records were lost. However, Saul has identified several staff members who survived and still reside in this country. I reported on my encounter with Marshall. Wolfe listened, eyes half closed. His reaction was minimal but present, I concluded. "Satisfactory. Tomorrow you will visit the National Archives branch office. They maintain microfilm copies of certain military records that may not have been lost in the bombing." "What about Harris?" I asked. "Still unconscious but stable. Dr. Bennett will contact us immediately if his condition changes." The next day was a frustrating exercise in bureaucratic stonewalling. The military archive staff were unfailingly polite and utterly unhelpful. Yes, they had records from Station 217, but they were fragmentary. No, there was no complete patient list from June 1944. Yes, there were death records, but without a specific name to search for, they couldn't help me. No, they couldn't allow me to browse the records myself. I was about to give up when a clerk, older than the others and with the look of a veteran himself, approached me as I was gathering my things. "You asked about Station 217, he said quietly. "June 1944. "That's right." He glanced around, then slipped me a piece of paper. "This man worked in records there, retired now, lives in Virginia. Don't mention my name." The paper had a name, Harold Winters, and an address. I called Winters from a payphone and got the expected brush-off. "I don't discuss those days," he said, and hung up. Back at the brownstone, I found Dr. Bennett waiting in the office with Wolfe. "I've been reviewing my notes on Captain Harris's case," she said after I sat down. "In our early sessions, Harris mentioned serving in the Pacific after recovering from his injuries in England. That would have been late 1944 through 1945. "Did he mention who he served with?" I asked. "Not specifically, but he did describe a battle on an island. I believe it was Peleliu, where his unit was nearly wiped out." I made a note of it, something to check against Marshall's service record. Wolfe pressed his lips together. "Dr. Bennett, how confident are you in the accuracy of Captain Harris's recovered memory?" She considered the question carefully. "Memory is complex, Mr. Wolfe. Trauma can distort it. But the consistency of the details over multiple sessions and the emotional content associated with the memory suggest it is based on a real event. Whether all details are accurate is another question." Wolfe said, reaching for his beer. He took a swallow, then set the glass down precisely. "Archie, have Fred check the service records for Peleliu. I wish to know if General Marshall was there as well." Dr. Bennett rose to leave. "There's one more thing. This morning I received a call from a man who claimed to have been at Station 217. He refused to identify himself but said I should, and I quote, 'Stop digging into things that are better left buried.' When I asked what he meant, he hung up." After she left, Wolfe sat with his eyes closed for 10 minutes, thinking. Then he opened them and looked at me. "We need more," he said simply. The phone rang just as Fritz was announcing dinner. I answered it and heard Saul Panzer's unmistakable voice. "I found something, Archie. A nurse who worked at Station 217. Margaret Holloway. Lives in Portland now. And get this, she kept a personal diary during her service." I covered the mouthpiece and looked at Wolfe. "Saul's found a nurse with a diary." Wolfe nodded. "Tell him to proceed with caution. The opposition is clearly monitoring our investigation." As I relayed the message, I heard Fritz open the front door. Then his voice, surprised. "Ah, General, Mr. Wolfe is not receiving visitors during the dinner hour." I hung up quickly and stepped into the hallway to find General Robert Marshall standing in our foyer, his military bearing making even our spacious entrance hall seem small. "I understand," he was saying to Fritz. "However, this matter cannot wait until morning." Chapter 4. The General's Visit. Dinner at the Brownstone is a sacred time. Not even murder has the right to interrupt it. But General Robert Marshall wasn't the kind of man who waited for invitations, and his unexpected arrival during the dinner hour created a situation I'd rarely seen in my years with Wolfe. Fritz looked pained, caught between his duty to protect Wolfe's mealtime sanctuary and the reality of a 4-star general standing in our hallway. "Confound it," Wolfe muttered, then sighed. "Very well. Show the general to the office, Fritz. Archie, attend me." That was unusual. Typically, I would handle uninvited guests while Wolfe enjoyed his dinner. That he wanted me present for this conversation spoke volumes. General Marshall stood as we entered the office, his posture perfect, his expression unreadable. He was alone. No aides in sight. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, with a nod that managed to be both respectful and somehow commanding at the same time. "Thank you for seeing me despite the hour, Mr. Goodwin." He acknowledged me with a glance. "General Marshall," Wolfe said, lowering himself into his chair. "This is a most irregular intrusion upon my schedule. My apologies. When matters of national security are involved, schedules must occasionally be adjusted." Wolfe's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "Is that what brings you here? National security?" Marshall remained standing, imposing in his perfectly tailored civilian suit. "I understand you've been making inquiries about Station 217 and a certain Lieutenant Jonathan Collins." I kept my face neutral, but inside I was startled. We hadn't identified Collins yet. That name hadn't appeared in Harris's journal or in our conversations with Dr. Bennett. The general was better informed than we'd realized. Wolfe didn't miss a beat. "Please sit, General. Standing merely emphasizes hierarchical positions, which have no relevance here. This is my domain." It was a subtle power move, and for a moment I thought Marshall might refuse. Then he gave a tight smile and took the red leather chair. "You didn't answer my question," Wolfe said. "Nor did you ask one," Marshall replied coolly. "But yes, I'm concerned about your investigation into events from 30 years ago. Events that have no bearing on the present except to potentially damage reputations and undermine public confidence in our institutions." "You refer to your pending cabinet appointment." Marshall waved that away. "My appointment is incidental. I'm concerned about the broader implications." "Such as?" "Mr. Wolfe, war demands actions that, viewed through the lens of peacetime morality, may appear questionable. Decisions made in the fog of war, with incomplete information and lives at stake, should not be judged by those who weren't there." Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you speaking hypothetically, General?" "I'm speaking practically." Marshall leaned forward. "Whatever your client believes he saw at Station 217, I can assure you the reality was more complex." "So you don't deny something happened involving Lieutenant Collins?" Marshall's face remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened slightly on the armrest. "I neither confirm nor deny anything, Mr. Wolfe. I'm here to suggest that pursuing this matter serves no good purpose." "I disagree," Wolfe said. "Truth always serves a purpose." "Does it?" Marshall's voice hardened. "When a man suffering from traumatic memory issues suddenly remembers something from 30 years ago that could destroy careers and undermine public trust in military leadership, when most witnesses are dead and records destroyed, what truth do you expect to find, Mr. Wolfe?" "The same truth I always seek in my investigations, General. The one supported by evidence." Marshall studied Wolfe for a long moment. "You have a reputation for discretion, Mr. Wolfe. for understanding that sometimes justice and the letter of the law diverge. My reputation is not your concern. Captain Harris is my client, by proxy through Dr. Bennett. Harris. Marshall pronounced the name carefully. William Harris. Good soldier. Brave man. I noticed he didn't seem surprised by Harris's identity, though we hadn't mentioned it. Did you serve with him after England, General? I asked. Marshall glanced at me. Yes, Pacific Theatre. He was transferred to my command after recovering from his injuries. Convenient, I said. Military necessity, he corrected. We needed experienced men. Wolfe pressed his lips together, then spoke. General, what exactly do you want from me? Discretion, a recognition that some past actions, while technically crossing lines, may have been necessary given the circumstances. Necessary for what? For the mission, for the larger objective. Wolfe's expression didn't change. You speak in generalities, General. I deal in specifics. Marshall stood abruptly. Then specifically, Mr. Wolfe, I am asking you to close this investigation, as a matter of national interest. I decline, Wolfe said simply. For a moment, tension filled the room. Then Marshall nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. Then I hope you're prepared for what you may uncover. He reached into his pocket and produced a card with a phone number handwritten on it. When you learn the full story, call me before you take any irreversible actions. He placed the card on Wolfe's desk, nodded to me, and showed himself out. When the front door closed, Wolfe sat silently, eyes closed, fingers interlaced over his substantial middle. I waited. Finally, his eyes opened. How would the General know we're investigating Lieutenant Collins specifically when we ourselves didn't know that name until just now? Someone's feeding him information, I suggested. Indeed. Or he's anticipating our discovery. Wolfe picked up Marshall's card, examined it, then set it aside. Archie, I want you to find Lieutenant Collins' family. Start with military death records for June 1944. If Collins was indeed killed at Station 217, there will be documentation somewhere, bombing or no bombing. I nodded, already planning my approach. Military bureaucracy might be formidable, but it never destroyed records completely. There were always duplicates, alternative sources, next of kin notifications. As I headed upstairs that night, I couldn't shake the memory of Marshall's expression when he delivered his parting line. He wasn't threatening us, not exactly. But beneath his controlled exterior, I'd glimpsed something unexpected. Not guilt or fear, but a deep, unresolved pain. Chapter 5. The Nurse's Diary. I spent the next day hunting for information on Lieutenant Jonathan Collins through every channel I could think of. By noon, I had confirmation that a Lieutenant Collins had indeed died at Station 217 on June 12, 1944, officially from complications of battlefield injuries. What those complications were, the records didn't say. When I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant rooms with Theodore, fussing over his orchids. Nothing interrupts his schedule with the plants, not even murder investigations, so I settled at my desk to organize my notes. At 4 o'clock precisely, the house phone buzzed, indicating Wolfe was descending from the plant rooms. Any progress? He asked when he entered the office and lowered himself into his chair. Some. Lieutenant Jonathan Collins, age 24 from Massachusetts, died at Station 217 on June 12, 1944. I haven't located his family yet. Wolfe nodded and reached for the beer that Fritz had just delivered. Saul telephoned. He has located Margaret Holloway in Portland, Oregon. She was a nurse at Station 217. Do we know if she was there when Collins died? According to Saul, she was. Furthermore, she kept a personal diary during her time there, which she still possesses. I raised my eyebrows. That's a break. What's our play? You will fly to Portland tomorrow morning. Saul has arranged an introduction. Will she talk to me? She has expressed reluctance to discuss military matters from that period. However, Saul reports that she is a woman of strong moral conviction who may be persuaded if approached appropriately. The next morning found me on a flight to Portland, with a stop in Chicago. I used the travel time to review everything we knew, which wasn't much. Lieutenant Collins dies unexpectedly. Captain Harris, recovering in the same ward, witnesses something involving a young officer who might have been Marshall. 30 years later, Harris remembers it during therapy, and suddenly people are breaking into offices, causing car accidents, and a 4-star general is interrupting Wolfe's dinner. Margaret Holloway lived in a neat bungalow in a quiet Portland neighborhood. She was in her 70s, white-haired and straight-backed, with the brisk efficiency of someone who had spent decades in the medical profession. Her eyes were sharp with intelligence and wariness. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, evaluating me on her doorstep. "Mr. Panzer said you'd be coming. I'm still not certain I should be speaking with you." "I appreciate your time, Mrs. Holloway. This is a matter of some importance." "It always is with men like you. Come in, but I make no promises." She led me to a small sitting room filled with books and photographs. A silver-framed picture on the side table showed a much younger Margaret in a nurse's uniform, standing with a group of medical personnel outside what I assumed was Station 217. "Mr. Panzer mentioned you kept a diary during your service," I began, after declining her offer of tea. "I did. A personal record, not an official one." "Would you be willing to share entries from June 1944? Specifically around June 12th? Her eyes narrowed. The Collins boy. I kept my face neutral, though I was surprised by her immediate recollection. "You remember him specifically?" "Young men died every day, Mr. Goodwin, but some deaths stay with you." She rose and went to a bookshelf, removing a small leather-bound volume from behind a row of medical texts. "I've thought about that day many times over the years." She held the diary but didn't open it. "Why are you asking about Lieutenant Collins now, after all this time?" "Someone who was there believes they witnessed something troubling regarding his death." "Captain Harris," she said, not as a question. I blinked. "You know about Captain Harris?" "I received a telephone call yesterday. A man who didn't identify himself asked if I'd been contacted about Station 217 and Captain Harris. When I said I hadn't, he told me I might be, and that I should decline to speak about it." "For the good of the country," he said. "But you didn't decline." She sniffed. "I've spent my life making my own judgments about what's good for people. I don't need mysterious men on telephones to tell me what to do." She opened the diary, flipping through yellowed pages covered in neat handwriting. "Here. June 12th, 1944. She handed me the diary. The entry was brief but clear. "Lieutenant, Collins took a turn for the worse this evening. His fever had been coming down, and Doctor Winters thought he might pull through despite the extent of his injuries. Then around 8 p.m, his condition suddenly deteriorated. I was attending to Captain Richards when one of the walking wounded came to visit Collins, tall lieutenant with a commanding presence. When I returned 20 minutes later, Collins was in acute respiratory distress. He passed within minutes, despite our efforts. Unexpected, given his earlier improvement. Lieutenant Marshall was still there, said Collins had become agitated about something. Curious that he didn't call for help sooner. I read it twice, then looked up at Mrs. Holloway. Lieutenant Marshall? Yes, Robert Marshall, before all the promotions and medals. He was recovering from shrapnel wounds, less severe than many. Ambulatory. Cold eyes, even then. The diary mentions Collins becoming agitated. Did Marshall explain what about? He said Collins had been delirious, talking nonsense. I didn't think much of it at the time. Delirium was common with high fevers. But now, she took back the diary, closing it carefully. Now I wonder. Collins had been lucid earlier that day when I checked his vitals. And there was something else. He'd been keeping a small notebook under his pillow. After he died, I couldn't find it. I made a note of that. What kind of notebook? Small, leather-bound. I'd seen him writing in it. When I asked once, he said it helped him remember things since his head injury. And it disappeared after his death. Yes, I assumed it had been collected with his personal effects, but it bothered me enough that I checked. It wasn't listed in his belongings that were sent home. When I left Mrs. Holloway's house, I had copies of the relevant diary pages and a growing conviction that we were onto something significant. I called Wolfe from the airport. The nurse's diary mentions Marshall by name, I told him, and a missing notebook that Collins kept. Wolfe said, which passes for excitement with him. There have been developments here as well. Dr. Bennett called. Captain Harris has regained consciousness, though he remains confused. And Ori has discovered something interesting. Official records confirm that Harris and Marshall served together in the Pacific, but there's a citation buried in an obscure field report that Harris saved Marshall's life during the Battle of Peleliu. I whistled softly. That's quite a connection. Does Marshall's official biography mention it? No, nor does it mention his time at Station 217. As I boarded my return flight, I noticed a man in a dark suit watching me too carefully from the gate area. He didn't follow me onto the plane, but his presence was a reminder that we weren't the only ones working this case. Someone was tracking our movements, staying one step ahead. I settled into my seat, thinking about Lieutenant Collins and his missing notebook. What had been in it that was worth removing? And what had Collins become agitated about in his final moments? Whatever it was, I had a feeling it was at the heart of this entire case. Chapter 6. Family Matters. Back in New York, I found Wolfe in the usual place, behind his desk with a book. He put it aside as I entered, raising his eyebrows in silent inquiry. Mrs. Holloway was surprisingly helpful, I said, handing him my notes and the photocopies of the diary pages. She remembered Collins clearly and Marshall too. Wolfe read through the material while I fixed myself a sandwich in the kitchen. When I returned, he was leaning back with his eyes closed, his lips moving in and out, his thinking pose. It is suggestive, he said finally, but far from conclusive. We need more. Collins's family? Yes. The military records you obtained listed his next of kin as a sister, Eleanor Collins, of Hartford, Connecticut. She would be elderly now if still living. I'll check it out in the morning. No, you will go now. Take the car. I blinked. Wolfe sending me on a 3-hour drive in the evening was unusual. Something urgent? Dr. Bennett telephoned while you were airborne. There was another break-in at her office last night. Nothing was taken, but a threatening note was left on her desk. I have invited her to stay at the brownstone temporarily. You think she's in danger? I think precautions are warranted. The note specifically mentioned her continuing to assist a deluded old soldier. Fred is bringing her here this evening. That explained Wolfe's urgency. With a house guest coming, he wanted me away from the brownstone. More than one person under his roof disrupts his routine, and a woman staying overnight would have him particularly on edge. I drove to Connecticut, arriving in Hartford just after 8 p.m. A quick check of public records revealed that Eleanor Collins had married and was now Eleanor Collins Whitaker. She lived in a small house in a quiet neighborhood west of downtown. I was in luck. Lights were on despite the hour. The woman who opened the door was in her mid-70s, with white hair and the same straight nose and strong chin I'd seen in Jonathan Collins's military portrait. Mrs. Whitaker. I introduced myself as a researcher compiling histories of servicemen from Connecticut who died in World War II. It wasn't entirely false. She was cautious, but not unwelcoming. You're interested in Johnny, after all these years. His story caught my attention, I said, following her into a living room decorated with family photos. Jonathan Collins smiled from one silver frame, young and hopeful in his lieutenant's uniform. "He was a good boy," she said, settling into an armchair. "Smart. He would have gone far. He was injured in France, correct?" "Yes, during the Normandy landings. Shrapnel wounds and a head injury. He was sent to a hospital in England to recover." Her voice tightened. "They said he was improving, and then suddenly he was gone. Complications, they called it." "Did they provide details about what happened?" "Very little. A form letter mostly. When his personal effects arrived, there was a note from his commanding officer saying Johnny had served with distinction." "Was there anything unusual about his effects? Anything missing that you expected to receive?" Her eyes sharpened. "Why would you ask that?" I kept my expression neutral. "I've found that personal items often tell us more about these men than official records." She studied me for a long moment, then stood and went to a small secretary desk in the corner. From a drawer, she removed a wooden box. "These are Johnny's things that came back," she said, opening it. Inside were the expected items: dog tags, a watch, some letters, photographs. She lifted a false bottom in the box, revealing an envelope. This came separately, a week after his other belongings. No explanation, no sender name, just a postmark from London. The envelope contained several pages torn from a small notebook, the edges ragged as if hastily ripped out. The handwriting was shaky but legible. "Johnny's writing," she confirmed. "He kept notes about everything. Our mother used to tease him about it." I scanned the pages. They contained observations about hospital routine, descriptions of other patients, and notes about treatments. Nothing immediately suspicious until the last page, dated June 11th, 1944. "Lieutenant M visited again today. More questions about the packet. Keeps asking if I told anyone about what I was carrying when I was hit. I didn't. Orders were clear. Deliver directly to Colonel Anderson at HQ. Packet is safe, hidden where no one will think to look. Head clearer today. Fever down. Nurse says I might be moved next week if improvement continues." "Did Johnny ever mention a packet or documents he was carrying?" I asked. She frowned. "No, but we didn't get many letters after he was deployed, and they were heavily censored." "What was his assignment? His specific role?" "He was a communications liaison. He carried messages between command posts." She touched the notebook pages gently. "Why are you really asking about Johnny, Mr. Goodwin?" I decided on a partial truth. "I believe there may have been unusual circumstances surrounding your brother's death, not complications from his injuries." Her hand trembled slightly. "I suspected as much. The timing, just when he was getting better. And these pages, arriving separately, no explanation." "May I take these?" I asked. "I'll have them copied and returned to you." She hesitated, then nodded. "Find out what really happened to my brother, Mr. Goodwin. After all these years, I'd like to know the truth. Back at the brownstone late that night, I found Wolfe still in the office despite the hour, a sure sign the disruption of a houseguest was affecting him. "Dr. Bennett is settled in the south room," he said when I entered. Fred brought Harris's medical chart. He regained consciousness briefly this afternoon but remains disoriented. I handed him the photocopies I'd made of Collins's notebook pages. "The missing notebook," I said, "or part of it. His sister had these pages." Wolfe read them twice, his expression unchanged. "A packet, intelligence material, presumably." "That's my guess. Collins was carrying something important when he was injured, something that might have been valuable to the enemy. And Lieutenant Marshall was asking about it." The phone rang, an unusual occurrence at that hour. I answered to find Saul Panzer on the line. "Archie, I found something. Marshall and Harris both served in the Pacific after England, but there's more. There's a citation buried in a field report from Peleliu. Harris pulled Marshall from a burning tank. Saved his life, but it's not mentioned in any of Marshall's official biographies." "Dr. Bennett mentioned Harris talked about Peleliu in therapy," I said. We need to know more about their relationship after the hospital. When I hung up, Wolfe was sitting with his eyes closed, fingertips pressed together. What are you thinking? I asked. That nothing is as simple as it first appears. He opened his eyes. We need to speak with Captain Harris directly, if he's coherent enough. Indeed. Tomorrow, Archie, we will visit the hospital. It is time to hear from the witness himself. I nodded, my mind still on those torn notebook pages and the mysterious packet that Lieutenant Collins had hidden where no one will think to look. Whatever it was, someone had wanted it badly enough to kill for it, or to silence the man carrying it. Chapter 7. Converging Paths. Getting Nero Wolfe to leave the brownstone requires exceptional circumstances. A witness who might identify a murderer, even one from 30 years ago, qualified. When I brought the car around at 10 a.m., Wolfe emerged from the front door with his customary scowl, Dr. Bennett beside him. This is highly irregular, Archie, he muttered, as he carefully lowered himself into the rear seat, which groaned in protest. Yes, sir. A regular day at the office would involve beer and orchids. Fouet. Dr. Bennett smiled faintly as she joined him in the back. I appreciate both of you coming. Captain Harris has been asking for you. The hospital was in Queens, a sprawling complex of buildings where Harris had been moved from intensive care to a private room. Security was evident. A uniformed police officer sat outside his door. Dr. Bennett arranged it, Wolfe said, noticing my raised eyebrow. A prudent precaution. The officer checked our IDs, then allowed us to enter. Captain Harris was propped up in bed, his face pale against the white pillows, an IV in his arm, and monitors beeping steadily beside him. He was in his 70s, with the wiry build of a man who had kept himself fit despite the years. His eyes were alert, but tired. Captain Harris, Dr. Bennett said. These are the gentlemen I told you about, Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin. Harris nodded weakly. Thank you for coming. Not much time. His voice was raspy. They're watching. Tried once, they'll try again. Wolfe settled into the chair beside the bed, which looked far too fragile for his bulk. Captain, we need to hear your recollection of what happened at Station 217 in June 1944. In your own words. Harris closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with visible effort. I was there 3 weeks. Shrapnel in my leg and side. Across from Collins. Good kid, smart, always writing in his notebook. Lieutenant Jonathan Collins, Wolfe prompted. Yes, he had a head injury, fever, but he was getting better. Harris paused, gathering strength. That night, June 12th, I was drifting in and out, pain medication. I saw Marshall come in. He went to Collins's bed. They talked. Collins got agitated. Harris's monitors beeped faster. Dr. Bennett moved closer, concerned. Take your time, Captain, Wolfe said. Harris nodded, then continued. Marshall, put a pillow over Collins's face, held it there. Collins struggled, then went still. I couldn't move, couldn't call out. Marshall saw me watching. He came over, said if I ever told anyone, no one would believe me. Said Collins was delirious, endangering an operation with his ramblings. Wolfe nodded. Did you know what operation he meant? No, not then. Harris coughed. Later, when I recovered, they transferred me to Marshall's unit in the Pacific, kept me close. Then Peleliu happened. You saved his life, I said. Harris looked at me sharply. How did you know? Military records. Yes, our tank was hit. I pulled him out before it exploded. After that, he was different toward me, like he owed me something he could never repay. But he never mentioned what happened at Station 217, Wolfe asked. Never. We both pretended it hadn't happened. After the war, we went our separate ways. I tried to forget. His gaze shifted to Dr. Bennett. Until the therapy. Why come forward now after all these years? Wolfe asked. Harris's face hardened. Marshall's being considered for Secretary of Defense. Man like that, with his finger on the button. No. Some lines can't be crossed, even in war. Wolfe sat back, his expression thoughtful. Thank you, Captain. One more question. Did Collins ever mention documents or a packet he was carrying when injured? Harris frowned. Yes. He was worried about it. Said it was important intelligence about the invasion. The Normandy invasion? I asked. Must have been. Timing fits. Did he say where he hid it? No, just that it was safe. When we left the hospital 30 minutes later, Wolfe was silent, deep in thought. Dr. Bennett looked troubled. His recollection matches what he told me in our sessions, she said as we drove back to Manhattan. The details are consistent. I believe he's telling the truth as he remembers it. As he remembers it, Wolfe repeated. Memories, especially traumatic ones, are notoriously unreliable. But not necessarily wrong, she countered. Wolfe grunted noncommittally. Back at the brownstone, we found Saul waiting in the office. He had been researching Operation Overlord, the Normandy invasion, and the intelligence operations surrounding it. There were several security breaches in the months before D-Day, he reported. The Allies were desperate to keep the exact timing and location secret. Even small leaks could have been catastrophic. And Lieutenant Collins was carrying sensitive documents related to the invasion, Wolfe mused. Documents he hid somewhere after being wounded. Documents Marshall was very interested in, I added. The phone rang. I answered to hear Inspector Kramer's gruff voice. Goodwin, what's Wolfe up to? I've got reports of you questioning military personnel about a death from 30 years ago, and now there's a protective detail on a Captain Harris. Is this a murder investigation? That's a good question, Inspector. Would you like to speak with Mr. Wolfe? Don't be cute, Goodwin. If you're sitting on evidence of a crime, I need to know. I covered the mouthpiece and looked at Wolfe. Kramer's fishing. He knows something's up with Harris's protection detail. Wolfe nodded. Tell him we'll explain tomorrow. I relayed the message, and Kramer, predictably, growled, but accepted it. He knows Wolfe well enough to recognize when pushing won't help. After I hung up, the house phone buzzed. Fritz's voice came through. There is a call for Dr. Bennett, the hospital, regarding Captain Harris. Dr. Bennett took the call in the office, her expression growing increasingly concerned. When she hung up, she looked pale. Captain Harris has had a stroke. He's unconscious and on a ventilator. They don't know if he'll recover. Convenient timing, I said. Indeed, Wolfe agreed. Too convenient to be coincidental. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, his lips pushing in and out as he organized the facts in his mind. We waited, knowing better than to interrupt. Finally, his eyes opened. Saul, continue your research into Operation Overlord, particularly any security concerns involving Station 217 or the surrounding area. Archie, contact Fred and have him maintain a discreet watch on General Marshall's movements. Dr. Bennett, I would appreciate your professional assessment of Captain Harris's memories. Not their accuracy, but what details or aspects might have been omitted or conflated. And what will you be doing? I asked, though I already knew. Thinking, Wolfe replied. We have most of the pieces now, but their arrangement remains unclear. He reached for his current book, a signal that conversation was finished for the moment. As I went to call Fred, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were nearing a conclusion, one that nobody, possibly including Wolfe himself, had fully anticipated. And somewhere in England, 30 years ago, a dying lieutenant had hidden something important, something worth killing for, then and now. Chapter 8. The Necessary Truth. By 2 o'clock the following afternoon, everything was arranged. Wolfe had spent the morning on the phone, a rare occurrence that signaled the gravity of the situation, while I handled the logistics of gathering everyone in the office. The red leather chair was reserved for General Marshall, who had agreed to come after a brief, cryptic conversation with Wolfe. Dr. Bennett sat in one of the yellow chairs, her face composed but tense. We had received word that Captain Harris had stabilized but remained unconscious. Fritz had just served beer when the doorbell rang. I went to answer it and found General Marshall on the stoop, alone and in civilian clothes. "Mr. Goodwin," he said with a nod. "General, this way, please." In the office, Marshall took in the assembled group with a quick sweep of his eyes, then settled into the red leather chair, his posture military straight. "Mr. Wolfe, Dr. Bennett." He acknowledged them both, then turned to me. "I received your message. You said you've reached a conclusion regarding Captain Harris's allegations." "I have," Wolfe said, after taking a precise sip of beer. "Though not perhaps the conclusion you anticipated." Marshall's expression remained neutral. "I'm listening." Wolfe placed his glass down carefully. Lieutenant Jonathan Collins was carrying sensitive documents related to Operation Overlord when he was wounded at Normandy. He hid these documents after being transported to Station 217, concerned about their security during his periods of delirium. "That's conjecture," Marshall said. "It is fact," Wolfe countered. "Confirmed by multiple sources, including Collins's own notes and Captain Harris's recollection. Memories from 30 years ago are hardly reliable evidence, which is why I sought corroboration." Wolfe nodded to me, and I placed the photocopies of Collins's notebook pages on his desk. Lieutenant Collins documented his concerns. His sister preserved these pages, which arrived separately from his personal effects after his death. Marshall didn't reach for them. "And what do you believe happened, Mr. Wolfe?" "On the evening of June 12, 1944, you visited Lieutenant Collins. He was recovering from his injuries, his fever reduced. During your conversation, he became agitated. You placed a pillow over his face and held it there until he stopped breathing. Captain Harris witnessed this from his bed across the ward." The room fell silent, except for the soft ticking of the clock on Wolfe's desk. Marshall's face remained impassive. "That's a serious accusation," he said finally. "It is. However, my investigation has uncovered the context surrounding your action, General. Context which significantly alters its interpretation." Marshall's eyebrow raised a fraction. "Go on." "Lieutenant Collins was carrying documents detailing aspects of the Normandy invasion, specifically the timing and location of a particular landing zone. When delirious with fever, he spoke of these details aloud, potentially within earshot of others. The security implications were catastrophic. Many lives were at stake," Marshall said quietly. It wasn't a denial. "Indeed." Wolfe leaned forward slightly. "You were not concerned about the documents themselves. You knew Collins had hidden them. You were concerned about what Collins might reveal in his delirium. If details of Overlord had leaked, thousands of Allied soldiers would have died," Marshall said. "Possibly tens of thousands. The entire invasion could have failed." Dr. Bennett gasped softly. "You're admitting to killing him." "I'm acknowledging that war requires terrible choices, Doctor." Marshall's voice was steady. "Collins was unconscious when I arrived. The nurse had just given him morphine for pain. But he was talking in his sleep, specific details about the landing at Juno Beach. A German-speaking orderly had been assigned to the ward that evening." "You verified this?" Wolfe asked. "There was no time. I made a decision based on the information available and the stakes involved." Wolfe nodded. "A decision you've lived with for 30 years. A decision that haunted Captain Harris equally long, though from a different perspective." Marshall turned to Dr. Bennett. "I regret that Captain Harris was burdened with what he saw. I meant what I said to him afterward. No one would have believed him, not because it didn't happen, but because the necessity of it would never be understood by those who weren't there." I watched Marshall carefully. There was no remorse in his voice for Collins's death, but there was something else, a weariness that spoke of decades carrying a weight that couldn't be set down. "What will you do with this information, Mr. Wolfe?" Marshall asked. "That depends on you, General. I understand the moral complexity of your position. I also understand Captain Harris's need for acknowledgement of what he witnessed." Marshall considered this. "I will withdraw my name from consideration for the cabinet position. That should satisfy Harris's immediate concern. And will you speak with him when he recovers? If he wishes it. Marshall looked at each of us in turn. I don't expect absolution, Mr. Wolfe. Just understanding that some actions, while technically wrong, may be necessary in their context. Wolfe didn't respond directly. Instead, he said, Lieutenant Collins's hidden documents, were they ever recovered? Yes. 3 days after his death, they were found sewn into the lining of his uniform jacket in the hospital storage. The information they contained helped ensure the success of several operations during the invasion. After Marshall left, Dr. Bennett remained, shaken by what she had heard. What will happen now? Very little, publicly, Wolfe said. General Marshall will withdraw from consideration, citing personal reasons. Captain Harris will receive the confirmation he sought, that his memory was accurate, without the burden of a public accusation that would be impossible to prove and divisive to air. Is that justice? She asked. It is resolution, Wolfe replied. Sometimes that must suffice. When Dr. Bennett had gone, I looked at Wolfe. Do you believe him? About the German-speaking orderly and the security risk? I believe he believed it, Wolfe said carefully. War creates moral grey areas that peace cannot fully illuminate in retrospect. Marshall made a calculation, one life against potentially thousands. A calculation that would be unconscionable in peacetime became, in his mind, necessary in war. Later that evening, after a dinner that Fritz had outdone himself preparing, perhaps sensing Wolfe needed the consolation of perfect food, I found Wolfe in the office with a book of war poetry open on his desk. A curious case, I said, settling at my own desk. No arrest, no public revelation, no clear villain or hero. Yet a truth uncovered, Wolfe replied. And perhaps for Captain Harris, some measure of peace in knowing his memory served him correctly, even after 30 years. I nodded, thinking about memory, how it persists, how it haunts, how it eventually demands to be acknowledged. Tomorrow we would visit Harris in the hospital to tell him what Marshall had confirmed. Then another case would be closed, if not precisely solved in the conventional sense. Wolfe reached for his beer, and I turned to my typewriter to begin the case report. Outside, spring twilight settled over New York, indifferent to old secrets finally brought into the light. Thank you for joining us for The Persistent Memory. Did you anticipate General Marshall's justification before Wolfe revealed it? Were you surprised by the moral ambiguity of the conclusion? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. If you enjoyed this journey into the world of Nero Wolfe, be sure to subscribe for more mysteries shared daily here on Curiosity. And remember, sometimes the truth lies not in what we forget, but in what we persistently remember.